I decided a little while ago that I wanted to go to India. I felt drawn to India. I think naturally anyone who is spiritually interested, I guess, especially if you've got an Eastern type of, not preference, but I enjoy a lot of Eastern teachings. I'm not aligned to any one religion, but I do enjoy Hinduism, Buddhism. So I went to India for 3 weeks, and towards the last week, I actually felt further away from God than I've felt in probably a long time, potentially years. And I want to share with you today why that was and how you can avoid doing this as well. Now, the first thing that I want to make clear is that I didn't go to India to find God specifically, or the divine, whatever you prefer to call it, because I understand that the divine exists within me and I don't need to travel anywhere other than inward. And I also understand that actually everything outside of me is also a manifestation of the divine. Even though the essence of it is within me, the projection of that essence is everything I'm experiencing outside. So I'm aware of all this, and I was aware of all this, but I wanted to go to India to have some isolated time with myself, to be able to spend time meditating, to be around an inspirational kind of environment. And I felt that isolated time and that dedicated time would give me the opportunity to go inward and experience more and more of myself, more and more of the divine, and get, progress spiritually. So for the first 2 weeks, I spent 2 weeks basically moving between a few different ashrams in southern India, and I spent around 5 days in one and then a couple of days in a few of the others. And I would basically park myself outside of the ashram in a hotel, and this was because I was teaching on my online school. I have an online school where I teach meditation and spirituality, and I was still doing all of that teaching through Zoom and things like that, so I needed Wi-Fi and I needed time to be able to still work on all of this. So I put myself outside of the ashram, and I would go into the ashrams in the day and I would then meditate, and I was probably meditating around 3 to 4 times a day on average, and I was feeling amazing. I was around all these other spiritual aspirants. There were statues of Krishna, there were statues of all these different amazing gods and spiritual teachings everywhere. I was reading a lot, so I was absorbing so much, and I was spending a lot of time inward, contemplating, meditating, connecting with the divine, and I was feeling as though I was making some really good progress. And I was going quite deep within myself. I was having some incredibly deep meditations, and all was seeming very good. But after about probably 10 days, maybe 11 days, I was starting to get the feeling that I wanted to go somewhere a bit nicer, because where I was around these ashrams, they were nice for spiritual work, but they weren't particularly aesthetic. And I wanted to go somewhere that was a bit kind of nice. I wanted to be by a beach. I was starting to get, I was starting to get a bit bored of the, I suppose, erraticness of India. I don't know if you've ever been to India, but there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of rubbish in some of the places in terms of like plastic and that type of thing. There were quite a lot of beggars, and although it's a very spiritual place, at the same time it can be quite a draining place. Depending on where you are, it can be quite draining. You have to be quite kind of on the ball all the time. As I say, the roads are really erratic. There's a lot of kind of air pollution, so it's beautiful. I loved it, and I love India, but at the same time I was sort of craving some physical isolation. I think that was the difference, is that in the ashrams you were kind of around a lot of people and a lot of traffic in the ones that I was at, and so I wanted to sort of take myself away and be somewhere a bit more aesthetic, a bit cleaner, a bit nicer, and just sort of relax. So I decided that at this point in time I was in Pondicherry, and I was at a ashram called Sri Aurobindo ashram, and I would go there in the day and meditate and do all of that. And I decided that I wanted to fly over to the other side of India and spend a few days in Goa and just have a kind of chilled out experience. So I found this basically shed that was up in this forest area, and then it was like a 10-minute walk to the beach, not even that, probably 5-minute walk to the beach. And I thought, beautiful, I have this beautiful environment where I can sit on, it had like a little porch, a little balcony area. I could sit out there, I can meditate, I can go to the beach, I can meditate there, and it should be bliss, and I'll have the benefit of being by myself, but I'll be in a beautiful, serene environment. Now this was my mistake, and this is where the important lesson is. When I got to Goa, I found that I quite quickly began to forget about the divine, or at least the extent to which I was remembering the divine prior was beginning to reduce quite significantly. I was still meditating twice a day probably, but during the day what I found was that my mind was so occupied in the outer world because of the beauty around me, because I was on this gorgeous beach, the sea was there were sort of rolling hills in the distance, I was in this beautiful jungle environment in where I was staying. It was only a little cheap sort of shed basically in the middle of nowhere, and I found that because I was surrounded by all this beauty and this outer world, this sort of aesthetical outer world, I forgot the divine more. And it reminded me so strongly of why a lot of these ashrams are in such basic places, why there's not much that is sort of profound externally for us to become absorbed in, is because that becomes a distraction. Unless you're constantly reminding yourself, this is the divine, this is the divine, I know that everything around me is the source. Unless you're constantly doing that, it's very easy to become consumed by this outer world and forget the source, forget God, which is exactly what happened to me. And I found that over the course of the next 4 to 5 days, I started to recognize that I was feeling more and more distant from the divine. Not to huge extents, but I noticed it a bit. And it also reminded me then of a teaching that was shared by a man called the Shivapuri Baba, who I speak about from time to time on this channel. And he said that beauty and art takes you away from God. Now this is enormous, because I think it's so easy to believe that beautiful things bring us close to the divine. Now whilst they can in some situations, I found that, and as he said, they actually make you forget the divine, because you become so consumed in the beauty. And although the beauty is a manifestation of the divine, you're not remembering the divine by just becoming consumed in it. You have to remember the divine inwardly. It's no good to look at a plant and say, oh, that's so beautiful, that's such a beautiful plant. You're not reminding yourself that it is a manifestation of what it is that you're trying to find. It's almost like, as you're looking at a film, if you're watching a film, you forget about the light that's coming through the projector onto the screen to display the film. You just become absorbed in the film. You forget the source, you forget the essence of the film. I know that's not, an exact way to describe this, but you kind of get the point. We forget the essence, we forget who we are, we forget the divine when we become so absorbed in the film itself. And my lesson in this video today, the lesson that I want to share with you, is that wherever you go in the world, it doesn't matter particularly where you are, the connection that you establish and maintain inwardly is the important thing. And you don't need to seek beauty externally in order to help you find God. In some ways you want to take yourself off to more, I suppose, neutral places that aren't so exciting or elaborate, so that you are more inclined to go inward. And this was a huge lesson for me. It just reminded me so much that, it surprised me actually how easy it was for me to slip into becoming consumed in the outer world and forgetting the whole reason that I was there. So I hope this lesson is a useful one to you. I hope it helps you in your journey and gives you some pointers for if ever you go traveling, or if ever you take yourself away to work on yourself spiritually. But failing that, I will see you on the next video. Thanks a lot.